Power and politics. Well, there are both in the jobs that we do in the criminal justice system. Power, you've got legitimate power, charismatic power, expert power, reward power, coercive power, all kinds of power. And the book goes into all of those in great detail. But you need to understand the difference between all of those because, quite frankly, some people exude or exemplify some of those types of power and some don't. And what's always interesting for me to have students do, especially students who currently work in the system, is to take wherever they work, the organization in which they work, and apply all of these different concepts to their place of work. And they often find, especially when we're talking about the power and politics components of it, they often are interested in trying to figure out what kind of power and authority people use and understanding the difference between power of authority and when it's important to use one and when it's important to use the other. Of course, in criminal justice organizations, you cannot divorce politics from what it is we do. We can't live with it, and we certainly can't live without it. We can't live with it because it makes our jobs miserable, because there's always the high-profile case that gets treated differently no matter what arm of the system we're in. However, we can't live without it because, quite frankly, it's politics that makes our jobs in some instances easier, in some instances more difficult, but it makes our jobs. So politics is one of those things that you can't live with and you can't live without. And if you are to, and I know most of you want to go on and attain management level positions in the organizations in which you work, you've got to understand the subtle but very important role that politics plays. If you can figure out how to navigate the shark-infested political waters, then you will be an excellent candidate for whatever management position you take on. So now let's switch gears just a tad and talk about conflict. We've got organizational conflict, we've got personal conflict, we've got all kinds of conflict. Well, organizational conflict. You can have in an organization, you can have individuals who conflict with each other. I'm Jane and I don't like Jim. I don't like working with Jim. I think Jim's a schlep. I don't think he knows what he's doing. He never gets his work done on time. He doesn't follow the rules. Whatever the case may be, you can have personal conflicts between two people. Then you can have group conflicts because each organization has different groups that comprise the whole. So you may have Group A that completes one part of the process and Group B that completes part B of the process, and neither understands what the other does. And so each group dislikes the other, mostly because they misunderstand rather than they just don't like the personalities. So you have individual level conflict and you have group level conflict that can certainly impact the overall organizational or the overall function of your organization. Then you can have intra-organizational conflict. You can have vertical conflict from the top down or from the bottom up. Okay, and then you can have horizontal conflict across groups, as I suggested. You can have line staff conflicts where your mid-management and your line staff disagree on how things should be done. Middle management are, quite frankly, they're in the worst position possible because they're getting directives from above on what to do, and then they have to turn those directives around and try to explain them to the line staff in a way that the line staff will buy into the idea and actually do it. So they get grief from above and they get grief from below. Think of it as a sandwich and being stuck in the middle and not being able to pleasing no one and angering everyone. And then, of course, the role that you play in the organization can drive conflict. So it's important to understand those intra-organizational issues. Then you can have inter-organizational conflict, where probation doesn't get along with the district attorney's office, or the district attorney's office doesn't get along with the public defender's office, or the police don't get along with the prosecutors, or the prison folks don't get along with parole. I mean, everybody's got a problem, and everybody thinks that everybody else isn't doing what it is they're supposed to be doing, generally speaking. So conflict is there, conflict is around us, conflict is a regular and customary thing. You need to understand the difference between intra and inter-organizational conflict. Then we have stages of conflict. There's latent conflict. That's the conflict where you know Jim is really angering you, but quite frankly, you're not going to tell him. So you might be passive-aggressive in your approach with Jim, and it's under the radar there. Then you have perceived conflict, where Jim and Jane might think that they're not getting along. One might think that the other is angry with them, and as a result, they might not be performing to their best. Then you have the felt conflict, which is that there is palpable, you can feel the palpable tension between Jim and Jane, that they're not getting along, that they're shooting each other dirty looks, that they're being mean or nasty to each other in meetings, whatever the case may be. Then, of course, there's manifest conflict, and then what happens after the manifest conflict, which is conflict aftermath. Manifest conflict is one of those situations where usually the supervisor will bring the 2 or 3 or however many parties are together and get everybody to try to come to some level of understanding about how each side feels. The question is what happens after that. If everybody leaves that room and they're still angry, then the supervisor didn't do their job and nothing has been resolved, and we start all over again with latent conflict, perceived, etc. So all of these methods or levels, stages of conflict are important, but really what's important is what happens at the end of it. If it's reconciled, if everybody can agree to disagree and move on, then the job's been done and you've been, or whomever has been successful in putting that conflict to bed. The book goes into some detail. I know there's a figure in the book that talks about conflict behaviors, competing conflicts, accommodating conflicts, avoiding conflicts, and then collaborating. Not going to spend too much time on this. It's important that you understand really that what we're looking for are collaborative conflicts. Again, at the end of the day, we can shake hands and say, I don't agree with you on this one, but it's okay. We can move on. Why? Because we all have a basic understanding of what the ultimate goal is that we're working toward. And if we're all working toward the same goal, then if we have differences of opinion on the way there, that's okay. And in fact, that's very, very healthy. But take a look at those conflict behaviors, because I am sure as you look at those, you will all chuckle and you will all be able to probably assign a face, if not a name, to each one of those behaviors in terms of somebody that you know who you work with. And once you become aware of how it is people address conflict, then you are able to combat it, right? Then you are able to figure out ways to overcome that. And so in this case, knowledge really is power. Finally, just a word about conflict management, which is really what all of this is about. You've got to process interventions. There are internal and external interventions that you can use. You've got to take into account personal characteristics. A good manager, a good leader, and a good manager understand not only the shortcomings of the people they work with, but their strengths as well. And if they're smart, if they're shrewd, they play to people's strengths and they minimize people's weaknesses. We can all sit around and figure out what's wrong with people. But if you can figure out a way to maximize somebody's strengths so that you get the most out of them in that regard, then you will be ahead of the game. But personal characteristics definitely drive the ability to manage conflicts. Informal rules, the way in which rules are applied. Are they applied uniformly? Are there some informal rules for some and some other rules for others? This is very important stuff. Constituent pressure. Are there people on the outside telling you that you have got to address some situation with some employee because that employee angered somebody in another agency? Got to take that into consideration. Of course, conflict of interest. If people that work with you have a conflict of interest, or if your organization has some conflict of interest, that's something you need to think about. Power and status. Obviously, power that somebody has. Just because you have a title doesn't mean you have power. Well, it does mean you have a power. Question is, to what degree can you actually exert your authority? Just because I'm king of the hill doesn't necessarily mean I can always get people to do what I want them to do. Okay, so the extent to which power and status play in getting the job done. And then, of course, organizational policy. The degree to which your organization have policies and procedures in place to actually manage conflicts. Those are the key things you want to think about when you're thinking about conflict.